Hello, Bonnie here with the next chapter of A Hunter-Gatherer's Guide to the 21st Century. This chapter was called School, and it has a different feeling or vibe than some of the other chapters. It sort of prodded at suggestions and some underlying concepts of what school could be without looking at specific schools and specific things that are happening. It was sort of a general and yet deep kind of exploration about school. And so I just wrote down some things that I thought were significant for me as I was reading it. So they talk about like what is school for, and how do we learn, and what should school be teaching us? Do things really need to be taught? And they kind of start off by saying that school as a concept is fairly new in human history. Before we had official schools where you were teaching something, people learned how to be adults. Like the purpose of childhood was to learn how to be a successful adult. And we didn't need formalized structures to show us the way. And they talk about how in other species there isn't a lot of teaching, although there is some in various species, but it's not, skills aren't really taught. They're more learned through observation and experience. I thought that was kind of a neat way to open it. One of the things that they talk about specifically involves paradoxes and where we encounter paradoxes and what that should be for us. And they argue that paradoxes, so when something contradicts each other, it allows us to explore contradiction. And if you think about it kind of as a treasure map, the paradox is like the X on the treasure map that says dig here. Like there's something here that you need to explore and understand. And it allows us to practice holding two opposing concepts or thoughts in our mind at the same time, which is a very good skill to be able to have as an adult. I thought that was a good point that they made specifically about paradoxes. And then they said, schools ought to help us deal with this question. They had a question and then they paraphrased it. So they said the same question twice. The first one was kind of like, who am I and why am I here? But I wrote down the second one because I thought it was a really great question that everyone should think about, and hardly anyone does probably. What is the biggest, most important problem that I can solve with my gifts and skills? Have you thought about that? Have I thought about that? That is a great question to help guide your purpose in life, like to help you discover and develop and create a purpose for your own life. What a great question. I'm going to read it again. What's the biggest, most important problem I can solve with my gifts and skills? Super great question. I don't have an answer. I need to think about that. Then they talk about the use of tech in schools and what that is kind of doing to our psychology. So it's recent in human evolution that we have been able to just look up the answer, and we don't have to retain the information ourselves. We can just look it up. And you might have experienced the decline in your cognitive abilities, specifically with things like maps and phone numbers. So since we've had maps available to us on our phone and GPS can direct us, as well as a memory bank in our phone to remember phone numbers and not needing like a book to look it up every time, you don't have to memorize it anymore. And so guess what has happened? You probably don't remember as many phone numbers and don't know your way around as well as you used to. Certainly if you have grown up knowing when you had to memorize phone numbers versus not. If you are quite young now and you've always had a phone that stores the numbers, you might not know what I'm talking about. That's definitely something that I've experienced. In fact, I actually specifically don't let my computer or devices remember my passwords. And it's frustrating for people if they're like trying to get into something and then I have to like go in and type in my password for, I don't know, some passwords don't share, obviously, but something that's innocuous about like a group Canva account or something like that, where it's not like my bank. But I specifically don't let the device remember because it forces me to type it in every time, and it forces me to remember my own passwords. And I think that's important. So I've strategically not allowed anyone but me to remember my passwords. Okay, I digress. So what happens when we're just looking things up? What is that doing to our cognitive abilities? And they argue that it teaches us to be less self-reliant. So we are less able to look at what's happening and to apply, like to find a pattern and to apply what we already know to a new situation. And I think that is really important as well, is to be able to recognize what's going on and then say, oh, I've seen this before and I can extrapolate this information, or this kind of sounds like a problem I dealt with before and here's how I'm gonna like attempt to resolve it now. Guess and check, does that work? Like if we're just looking things up all the time, we're not retaining that information and we're not applying it to get a deeper understanding in the moment. I think that is a very good point that they made. Okay, just a couple more points. They said that the goal for higher education, university, and I thought this was so great, should be to teach us to hone intuition, so to develop and believe and trust in our intuition, to be experienced in the world, to reliably recognize pattern. So we need to have enough exposure and experiences to have a foundation and some scaffolding to see that there's patterns in the world. To return to first principles when trying to explain something, so breaking it down to its like very most basic components, core truths, and to reject authority-based explanations. So, because I said so and I'm the boss and that's why. So I thought that was a great goal for higher education. And then as always, they have suggestions, what can you do to sort of correct a little bit for what's going on in this new novel world. And I wrote down specifically in the relation between parent and child. I'm a parent. What am I going to teach my son right now? And they said to teach your kids to honor good rules and to question bad ones, and not to break rules just for the sake of breaking them, but to question what the rule is for. If it's a good rule and it makes sense why it's a rule, to make sure you're following that. And if it's a bad rule, to be free to break it because it's bad. And I think that is something that I'm going to very much apply in my own parenting. So that's all I had for school. It was kind of a different chapter and not a lot of like super facts. They still sourced a lot of stuff. So the appendix in this book is very, very thorough. But yeah, it had a different kind of vibe. The next one is adulthood, which is exciting because here I am as an adult and I know a lot of people that are still struggling, including myself, on how to adult. So I'm excited to see what they have to say. That's all. I hope you have a magical day. Bye.